public matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements, and that only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed session was convened were heard, discussed, or considered, and I would ask for a roll call. Svarstone.
Dr. McGraw,
Aye.
Mr. Atkins,
Aye.
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Mr. Spoonhour,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Mr. Thornton,
Aye.
Mr. Byerly,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Stoney.
Aye.
And also make sure that the record reflects that Ms. Nelson was not able to join in the closed session. Therefore, she's not required to vote or indicate in any way, shape, or form. Thank you. Based on the item that was discussed in the closed session, I'm gonna make a motion to select Boyden as successful to hire them for the search for the executive director and services based on the RFP that was issued, and authorize the chairman to negotiate final terms of the contract and execute the final terms of the contract. Boyden subject to review and approval by the HR roundtable and legal counsel. Would I have a second to that?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Barlow. Do we have any discussion on the motion? I would say is that I will be consulting with the finance chair as we move forward with these negotiations, and I may reach out to some other members on the board to ask for their wisdom and advice if something should come up. So don't be surprised if you don't get a phone call. And I would thank those members that made suggestions in closed session for their input. It was extremely helpful. There is a motion and second on the floor. I'd ask for a roll call vote.
Dr. McGraw,
Aye.
Mr. Atkins,
Aye.
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Mr. Spoonhour,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Mr. Thornton,
Aye.
Mr. Byerly,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Stoney.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thank you. Moving back to the CVTA Finance Committee, Mr. Peterson.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And at this point, the next two items are the revenue projections and the CVTA regional allocations. And I will turn it over to Mr. Parsons for that.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Going to the rescheduled or reshuffled agenda, the financial activities and investment reports is included in your packet on page 9. I wanted to highlight the portfolio mix. Obviously, this is continuing the positive trend that we discussed last month in terms of the investment decisions that are being made and the reinvestment funds. I can report that as of, I believe, yesterday, one of the CVTA CDs reached maturity and was reinvested for another year. This was after a consultation with the chair of finance committee and Chesterfield County Treasurer's Office to ensure that we did have enough fluidity in our available funds to commit to the projects that are moving forward, expected to move forward over the next 12 months. So that is, we do have an additional 1-year CD that is has just begun this week. Mr. Chair, if there's no questions, I did want to provide a brief update on the revenue projections versus actual. This is something that the Finance Committee discussed last month. And just as a quick refresher, as you know, each year, starting in 2020, I believe December of 2020, VDOT releases revenue projections for the year. And this is what we use as our baseline to study how the sales and gas taxes are performing and what the actuals are versus what the expectations have been. And I wanted to provide a brief update now that we do have at least 2 full years of data available. The projections for FY21 from VDOT were $145.8 million in revenue. The actual for 2021 for FY21 was $137.4 million, so a little lower than the projection. The revised projection for FY22 was $181.1 million, from BDOT. That was December of 2021. Was the issue date of that projection? The actual for FY22 was 205 million. So I saw a fairly sizable increase in the actual revenues. And then based on the first 3 months of FY23 that we have data for, it looks to continue that trend from last fiscal year, that revenues could see an increase over what the projections are. A couple footnotes: we are expecting new projections this month, if all goes according to plan from VDOT. So we'll be able to provide a new, at least a 12-month improvement in the projections that the state is looking at. And I did do a little bit more digging in terms of FY22, where we saw the actual increase. The projections were the mix between sales and gas tax. We actually received a higher actual revenue from the sales tax than expected, and a little bit lower from the gas tax. That's not uncommon, and that's kind of what we are watching as we talk about the bond market and potential sources for how that type of mechanism might occur. Gas tax is going to be a lot more in flux depending on travel patterns and fuel standards and everything else. So the sales tax is a more solid foundation for making any future decisions on investments and actions.
I didn't actually see that in the packet.
No, I just did back of the envelope. We'll be happy to put something together.
We make sure that we sent all that information out to all of the members so they can have it for their records as part of the permanent record.
Yes, sir.
Any
All right,
questions?
that's it for the update, Mr. Peterson.
Any questions from Mr. Parsons?
I have a question.
Please, Mr. Parsons.
Mr. Thornton.
As you know, Mr. Chairman and Chairman of the Finance, we do this as a team. We have partners, VDOT, and some other partners when we make allocations. But my question is though, what do we do as a organization to kind of watch out for people overcharging us? I think that is something we need to take under consideration, how to protect our investments, but not being overcharged by groups. I don't hear us talk about that so much. I think it's something we need to heed and be aware of and find some way of protecting our investments and our fiduciary accounts as what we do. We don't talk about that so much, but I think in the 21st century, that's critically important because what it does, it protects each agency. I just want to put on the board, Mr. Chairman, for the other commissioners, something we don't talk about, but critically important, I believe.
Follow-up question, Mr. Thornton, is there a specific organization or that we're worried about being charged too much? Or are you talking about the projects that we're going to be moving forward?
In general.
In general, okay. I'm pretty sure we're not charging anything for what we're doing from Chesterfield. If that's good to know. I don't think Richmond's charging either. So, but that is a great point, and that's something that's been brought up in other committees. And I know that we're looking at in the TPO, what the projections are going to look like on many of the projects as they move forward based on, those numbers changing because of inflation.
If the project, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if a project is under budget, is that money returned back to the community?
Yes. Well, it's if a project's in the budget from the regional pot, then that will come back to us. If a project is on the budget 50%, then the locality will have the opportunity to reallocate that to a regional to a project they're working on, and just submit back to the CVTA that they came in on the budget and that the money's being shifted to a different project.
Mr. Chair, the last thing I have from the Finance Committee, we will be having a report here from our financial advisors that have sent to this full board for informational purposes today. We reviewed the methods of financing and how to deal with the escalation of prices that we're dealing with today. But the consensus on the finance committee was that we would not make any changes to our current policies until after we got the results from this next round of smart scale. But it's important that everybody hears the full presentation that PFM has given to us. And I believe Ms. Choi is going to give that to us today. And that I believe, and that is later on the agenda, but that is the only thing left on the finance.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. The next would be the, I think the tech update, is that correct? And thank you, Mayor. Our chair of the TAC will give us an update.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Chair, thank you. Tyrone Moore Clark here. Today I'll be giving a brief update from the Technical Advisory Committee as its chair. First, an update on the Fall Line Trail. Tax Fall Line Trail Working Group met in November. The locality members were able to recommend an Fall Line Trail spending plan. Thank you for that approval today, which had some prioritized segments of the Fall Line totaling around $134 million. There is approximately $13 million in unprogrammed Fall Line Trail CTB funds remaining. It should be known that around $94 million of Fall Line Trail needs remain to be unfunded, mainly in Richmond and Chesterfield. The region will continue to work with the state and federal partners to try and secure additional funding in the near future. Localities' attorneys are reviewing their SPA agreements, agreements between the localities and the authority, and coming to the full body for approval in January or February. So we're still reviewing that, but would need this body's approval to have that document certified for use. Lastly, TAC has been discussing specific considerations for change to the annual review update of the project selection and allocation framework. These parking lot items, as TAC likes to call them, were discussed at our November TAC meeting, and we will continue to discuss at our December and January meetings as we are looking for a fall 2023 open application period for CVTA regional funds. Some of the items being discussed are reevaluating the procedures in which CVTA regional dollars are used for smart scale leverage, considering how cost overruns, project estimates, and project management will be managed, and reconsidering how roadways are qualified and made eligible for regional funding. That concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
That was a great, concise report. We appreciate that. Anybody have any questions on the tech update? All right, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Not seeing any questions on the TAC update. We're going to move forward to other business, which would be GRTC's micro transit study. I believe we have a presentation as well.
Yes.
Thank you for being here today.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. We will be doing an update. I have online our two consultants, Michael Baker and Associates and Foursquare. Sure they're moved over. Okay. So is Jessica on as well?
Can you check?
I've lost my connection, so I'll have to.
Okay, I'll go ahead and kind of give a background. So the study was kicked off in July 2021 as part of our regional public transportation plan that came to CVTA, was to look at what we could also do besides fixed route that could work for the current jurisdictions operating within the GRTC boundary, but also the rurals. So we have gone through over a year-long process and are about to close up what is called phase one. We will be going to our board to kick off phase two, which CVTA approved the funding for the next study, which will be about implementation for this actual plan. I'm going to let the consultants kind of talk about the background very briefly on the study of where we got to today, and what are our kind of pilot zones that we want to move forward with in FY 24. So handing it over to Nick.
Can you hear us?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I think Jessica Alvarez needs to be promoted to the panel. She's the other presenter.
All right, we're working on that.
All right, great. Next slide.
Well, we got to get back to that in a second. We got to get the other person added in.
Okay.
Okay. Ready to go.
All right. So just real quickly for an agenda today, I know we're concerned about time, so I wanted to briefly go over what microtransit is and kind of the background of the study, and then our findings and recommendations will follow that, and then we'll talk about the next steps for moving forward into phase 2 of this project. Next slide. Sorry, next slide. So microtransit, I think many people are familiar with it, but some aren't. What I like to do really is just to have people think about Uber and Lyft. And the reason that is because microtransit is very much a technology-based service where you use your phone to basically call a ride, and it's on demand. You know, the waits are something like 15 to 20 minutes, similar to what you would find with a ride sharing system. The big difference is that these trips are true public transit in that you're not guaranteed a private ride. So if you call a ride and say your neighbor calls a ride at the same time or roughly the same time, and you're going to similar locations, it's possible that you would share the trip. The fare is generally higher than fixed route, but it is usually affordable. It's lower, generally speaking, much lower than Uber or Lyft. But we have not made any decisions yet on the exact fares for the service, any of the pilots that we're talking about here. And there are no, this is similar to paratransit in kind of appearance, but there are no actual conditions for ridership. So it's not limited to persons with disabilities or seniors. It is open to the general public. And just as a kind of an example of what the vehicles do look like in the bottom right corner, you have an example out this is in Norton and Wise County, Virginia, in Southwest. Generally, they're a little bit smaller, giving a little bit more flexible transit service. You're not going to have 40-foot buses picking up people curb to curb. Next slide. So some of the things that we think about when we talk about microtransit service is where it's most suitable, and if that suitability sort of conflicts with other types of transit options. So you really want to look at places where there's a need for transit among the population due to various factors like income levels, the number of zero-car households, things like that. But where the density may not be so large that you have a need for fixed route transit. So you might see this sometimes in a city, but generally speaking, you'll see this more in kind of a suburban area. And some of the zones that we have picked that we'll show you later do reflect that. You also have to have enough activity to keep the vehicles going. Since it's not on a loop like a fixed route service would be, the cars are sort of moving as needed where they need to go. So it depends kind of on the context of where you implement the microtransit service, whether or not you have some more structured service where you call further ahead the schedule, or it's more on demand. And then finally, the good thing about microtransit, it's very customizable and flexible. So if certain things aren't working or the zone needs to be modified a little bit, you can do that sort of as you're moving forward without having too much of a impact on the provision of the actual service itself. So it does allow for some kind of on demand or on the go kind of customization as needed. Next slide. Well, sorry, next one. So the purpose of the study that GRTC conducted is to look at the region, that includes all 9 counties, in the region and all 9 jurisdictions, excuse me, in the region, and look to see where on-demand microtransit would be beneficial to the public and to the populations there, and then also feasible and cost efficient. And then set the parameters for a number of hours and who should operate it and how it should operate. Throughout this process, we did a fair amount of engagement. We had a large public survey going last year, and we met with most of the jurisdictions, actually I think all the jurisdictions, excuse me, to discuss kind of their just overall mobility and transit needs, not necessarily microtransit, but how we did want to talk about how microtransit could fit into that and to their needs. And we also spoke to other stakeholders, including other transit operators in the area, like Bay Transit in Charles City and New Kent, Hanover Dash, which is the paratransit service in that county, and Chesterfield Access Chesterfield, which provides another type of on-demand service. So in addition to that, we did quantitative analysis. We looked at the populations of the area, the transit propensity, all those demographics that kind of lead us to sort of identify areas where transit there may be a gap in transit service. We also look to see where people are coming and going in those different areas in those zones, so we can really fine tune what zones these microtransit services would operate within. And then we also looked at other peer agencies throughout the country, similar in context and size to Richmond, to look to see how their microtransit services have done, and did a peer agency interviews with them, and then best practices reviews of what's worked and what's not in the past few years of microtransit implementation. Next slide. So in terms of engagement, just real quick, kind of an addition, the public survey, we had about 80% of the respondents were willing to pay up to $6 per trip and wait 20 minutes, which is generally in keeping with what you see kind of nationwide. Most people said they were comfortable with that technology application-based booking, but there are call center options available for people who do not wish to use their phone to hail rides. Like I said, we met with other operators, providers in the region and all the 9 jurisdictions. We also have met with the Public Transportation Working Group of the RRTPO, Plan RVA, and to get more input and kind of fine tune some of these zones and make changes moving forward. And then we have briefed the board throughout the project, which has been about a year long now. And I am going, I think now turn it over to Jessica. She just joined to go over sort of like the more qualitative, or sorry, the quantitative aspects of and kind of the recommendations we have for the zones.
Thanks, Nick. Hopefully you all can hear me. I don't know if you can see me, but I'll pop up eventually.
We see you.
Okay, good. So our technical approach was designed around identifying those locations throughout the region that made sense to operate these microtransit services. We looked at both qualitative and quantitative inputs, as Nick has just recently discussed. Qualitatively, we looked at the outreach we did with the jurisdictions, with the public, with different various stakeholder groups, and quantitatively, it was a very heavily data-informed process where we used various data sources to understand which populations would benefit the most from this type of services and where there were various densities that would support it. Next slide. I think yeah. Fortunately, I think there's some animations that didn't pop up, but we can keep going. So our approach consisted of 5 steps where we intertwined that outreach that we did. We began by identifying potential zones across the region to understand where it could make sense, and held meetings with each jurisdiction to gather their input on what we were seeing. Based on that input and further analysis, we refined those zones and conducted our data-driven prioritization of the zones for further study. Then we held a public transportation working group session to gather additional input on those top priority zones to make sure that we were really designing them in a way that the community needed. Based on that input, those priority zones were then put through a model that allowed us to identify the vehicle requirements and costs to operate each model based on various provider and service models. And then we took another step at those with those zones and kind of readjusted the boundaries based on those costs that we were seeing and how people were flowing between the zones or within the zones to make sure that we were able to provide a suitable service within those zones. And we developed a short list of higher priority zones for further consideration and refine those cost estimates. We also went back to the Public Transportation Working Group at this session to discuss each zone's readiness for implementation. And then based on that input, we developed pilot recommendations to proceed into the next step for implementation. Next slide. Yeah. So our findings, as I mentioned, led to these pilot zones that we want to implement in the near future. We've identified 5 zones, and you can see here they're in blue, and I'll talk a little bit more to them on the next slide. But we're able to focus in on these zones and push them forward to the next step of implementation through this process. And so the 5 zones, next slide, please. The 5 zones consisted of Washington Park, Azalea Avenue within Henrico County. This was designed to replace underperforming fixed route service. We also identified Ashland in Hanover County. This one, there's a need for public transportation in the area and would be suitable for microtransit services. Sanson Elko and New Kent and Henrico counties covers areas in both of these counties that include shopping, healthcare, and government destinations. And it serves an area with a recognized public transportation need. Powhatan County, we have some major destinations along Route 60 that need to be served, as well as residential areas to the northeast. And the 5th zone was in North Chesterfield, in Chesterfield County. This is where we identified top priorities for Chesterfield County and serves apartments, shopping centers, and supermarkets. As you can see here, when you look at the 5 different zones, there's various models that will be operated. Some will be operated by GRTC, some by a third-party provider, and we were able to identify the associated cost for each with a range based on the demand that we will eventually see come from these zones. And then just to kind of quickly highlight each of these, and we have a report that supports all of these recommendations with a lot of detailed information. You'll see for each zone, we built out a zone profile that really focuses in on the number of population and the number of jobs being served, and particularly looking at low income and minority populations, and we detail the span of service. And you can see using our model, we were able to estimate the demand throughout the day. So we had a clear understanding of the number of vehicles that would be required. And we can go through each of the zone profiles just to show you what they're serving. Here's Ashland. You can see the shopping centers, and Randolph-Macon College is part of the zone. The next one, Sanson Elko. There's some key activity centers, a social security office, and the VCU Health Emergency Center are within this zone. Powhatan, it covers the Powhatan Plaza and the county library. This one's defined is a new service area to provide neighborhood circulation. And the final zone is in North Chesterfield, as you can see here, around Route 360, some of the key destinations that would be served by this zone and residential areas. So in terms of next steps, we're going to begin phase 2 of the study to look at pilot implementation planning, where we get more in depth in how it's going to be operated and how the mobile application will work. This will include coordination with our jurisdictional partners. The funding for this has come through a successful TRIP application, which will fund 3 of the zones. And then we have COVID relief funds that will fund the additional 2 zones. The expectation is to launch the pilot in fiscal year 24. And as you can see here is a link for more information. So you can see the entire study at this webpage on GRTC's webpage.
And I'll cover a little bit more of just the next steps. So we are planning to take to our board in December for the actual software that would support microtransit to be utilized. As well as in January, we'll be taking the phase 2 study for that to be kicked off for implementation plans. And as Jessica just said, we found out this week that we were successful in our mid-cycle application for the Transit Rider Incentive Program. So 3 of the 5 zones were funded. Those were the 3 that were kind of closest to our network. We do plan on applying for demo funds through DRPT for the other 2, but we do also have earmarked COVID relief dollars to utilize for those zones as well. So the COVID relief dollars are good through 2029. So we're hoping that we can make this sustainable as we pilot those. Question?
Any questions on Ms. Peterson?
Doris, I noticed that Ashland and Powhatan were third-party providers. My assumption is, and I'd like you to confirm that those third-party providers will be contracted through GRTC. Is that correct?
That is the current plan. Yes.
Good point. Anybody else? Any?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I do have a question. For those areas that are not included in this plan, what types of plans do you have from as relates to any type of financial support for their own development?
Yeah, the plan for the other, so there were, there's a slide that shows readiness. So we did meet with the jurisdictions and they let us know kind of the variables in terms of if it was ready in terms of demand or political support. So we would be working with the other zones to help them get to that point, determining with, some said 1 to 3 years, some said 3 to 5 years. And there was one that was 5+ years. So we still plan on working with them to get the point to be ready to implement. Hoping that we see how this works in that same timeframe. Answer?
So as a follow-up question, I could tell.
No, I think I'll follow up with you later.
Okay.
Okay. I think there's a willingness for them to certainly work with the other jurisdictions that may not be part of it right now. But I think if I'm hearing this right, when you spoke with some of the jurisdictions, they said they were not prepared at this time. So maybe need to follow up with our jurisdictions as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Thornton,
Mr. Chairman.
I almost called you Mr. Chair. I'm so used to that.
Mr. Chairman, I thought that was a good report, but I do want to suggest that I didn't see too much about quality and what I call good customer service. I think in any plan that we have, and I think micro transit is the way to go, but I didn't hear too much about quality service on that. So I'm hopeful that that will be inclusive in the plan itself.
Absolutely. There's going to be a full effort for engagement, marketing efforts, and in the refinement of the zones, working with the jurisdictions to make sure we actually have it right. So we hope it's quality service as well, to have it designed properly. And the benefit of microtransit is if it's not in the zone, as far as the boundaries, you can make adjustments to it, opposed to a fixed route that takes months to change.
Any other questions, commissioners? Thank you for the presentation. We appreciate it. I'm certainly, everybody knows that if you have any further questions, you can reach out. A copy of this presentation will be getting sent to all of you with all the contact information that you need. And for those who are online who assisted with the presentation, we thank you for your time today and thank you for your work on the presentation. As I had anticipated, because we scheduled this meeting later than we normally do, because we were piggybacking on the Plan RVA meeting, I anticipated that we may be working into the lunch hours. And so we've taken the liberty of ordering a box lunch for the commissioners that should be being put in the back right now. So if you're okay with it, I would like to take a brief 5-minute recess, which would give you an opportunity to, because I know we had to rush into this meeting to get lunch, get something to drink, and then we'll come back, reconvene, and finish the agenda. Does anybody have any questions on it? So I'll make the motion that we recess for 5 minutes. Have a second.
Second.
I'll second it. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We'll reconvene in 5. Thank you. Couldn't have people hungry. Whenever you're ready. We up and running? Yep. I am now going to call back to order the CVTA committee meeting. Thank you, everybody, for any indulgence of allowing our commissioners to work through this working session, working lunch. And I think next on the agenda is a presentation from PFM. Sir.
All right, thank you very much. My name's Kevin Roddy, and as Mr. Peterson said, this is a presentation that we gave to Finance Committee about a month back, but thought it'd be helpful, especially based on the discussion this morning and some of the information that Mr. Parsons shared and Mr. Peterson. So if we go to the next slide, just resetting your previous actions, as we all know, in 21-22. We allocated about $110 million for the Fall Line Trail and some local projects. And then in April of this year, we funded 30 projects, which really covered that period FY 23 through 26, which totaled $276 million. And then subsequently in June, we were the request was brought to us to do $100 million for the I-64 project. So that's kind of what we've committed. The spreadsheet that was shared with you earlier showed a allocation strategy based on a pay-as-you-go basis. And as we'll see on the next slide, this is the revenues, and Mr. Parsons talked about this earlier. You see FY 21 and 22 actuals of the sales tax, the fuels tax. Our portion of that is the 35% regional usage. As you can see there, we're expecting the additional forecast to come out this month, and we'll update this slide. But the forecast by nature, we believe, is a little conservative. If you look at that first top line, sales tax revenue, actual in 22 was 156 million. And the forecast shows 131 million of sales tax going forward and then growing some. So we're hopeful to see some growth in there. But as Mr. Parsons said, it could be offset somewhat by the fuels tax. But this really shows us our revenue stream that we've worked forward and programmed out. On the next slide, it's showing the math of this. It shows us having allocated total sources, projects of just under 400, our total sources of revenue, just under 400 million. And our commitments through this period is 486 million. So we're about 88 million over. And so the plan that was brought before you on the pay-go basis is really extending out to FY 27 and FY 28 so that you have funds to cover that amount. This doesn't speak of reserves and you know, there's a plan for reserves as well in there. So the next slide. So it obviously brings up the logical question of, you know, are there other ways to do this? Plus a lot of other things that we need to be concerned about. As everyone knows, a lot of project costs are escalating. You've got some approvals, the smart scale coming through, the potential for new projects as well. But if you do the math and see the spreadsheet earlier, it's showing just about $20 million being available between now and FY 28 is basically our capacity on a pay-as-you-go basis. So certainly the intent right now isn't to recommend debt or do any of that, as Mr. Peterson said, but really let everybody know that this is a tool in the toolbox and something that the Finance Committee will continue to evaluate as we get updated forecasts as we are going. So we thought it'd be helpful to just walk through an example of the debt process so that you get a feel for how that works. On the next slide, in terms of trying to determine CVTA's debt affordability, most localities use a debt service as a percent of their budget as a guide, typically around 10% or less. You're trying to keep your debt service as your budget. Well, on deals like this, where we've got a revenue stream that's coming in, that's really the guiding factor on revenue bonds, on dedicated tax backed bonds. And so that's really called a debt service coverage ratio. So we aren't really looking to a percent of our budget or a percent of that revenue stream. We're looking at what is that revenue stream? That's the numerator, 35% of CVTA as an example. And then your annual max annual debt service. So in the example on the screen, it's showing $70 million annually coming in. If we wanted to strive for a maximum of 2 times coverage, that would tell you right there that you need to, limit your debt service to no more than $35 million. So that would provide you adequate coverage, some safety if your revenues do bounce around, but give you that targeted 2 times coverage factor. And that's how we kind of start the process of working through what your debt affordability is. So on the next slide, we look at an example of, as we showed in an earlier slide, we're short about $88 million. So we just rounded it up and said, how about if we went out and borrowed $100 million, what's that going to cost us in today's debt market? And what would our coverage ratio be? So our recommendation, as we discussed earlier, is really just pledging to the bondholders the sales tax. That's the known stream, because you're going to be going out for a longer period of time with these bonds. In this instance, we're proposing a 20-year amortization. Certainly the length of these assets, you could go longer, but being conservative, a 20-year basis. And a lot's going to happen to that fuels tax over the next 20 years. It's going to be very difficult to project that. So what if we just focus on the sales tax portion of that? We've assumed a historical borrowing rate at around 4.25%, which is interest rates have gone up a little bit and they've come back down. And so that's probably a good indicative rate in today's market. And so what that translates on, if we went and borrowed $100 million, it's going to result in annual debt service of $8.2 million for over the 20-year period. And so how that works, if we go to the next slide, that would just be integrated in with your pay-go plan. On this slide, the blue is the debt service, the yellow is the pay-go. So you'd be using, if you wanted to go out and leverage that revenue stream and borrow $100 million today, and you'd be paying $8 million of debt service, you would have that going toward the bondholders, and then all the yellow bars would still be available for paying as you go. So that would be one way to create, $100 million of capacity. On the next slides, and what does that translate into coverage? What does the bondholder see? They'd see a revenue stream of about $49 million. And again, that's only the sales tax portion of this, debt service of $8 million. And so you're at 6 times coverage, certainly very conservative, just borrowing $100 million. Again, I'd indicated earlier, 2 times coverage is kind of the threshold that we'd suggest. So, quick math on that, you could basically triple that $100 million, end up with $24 million of debt service to get down to the 2 times coverage, which is effectively saying our debt capacity is right around $300 million. Just as we put that in the back of our mind is additional project costs come along, as new projects come along, just so you you have a semblance of kind of knowing what you would have on is your credit card limit. Just think of it as roughly $300 million. And again, we would think that would be very conservative in the projections that we're seeing. On the next slide, this is consistent with how all the other transportation authorities in Virginia have done this. They all have this 2 times coverage as their threshold. And with that, our expectation would be that you would achieve very high ratings in the strong AA category, which is extremely strong for revenue bonds. So I think if we follow that strategy, if and when the time is right, it will position us to do this. So the last slide is really just the takeaways, things for you to think about as we move forward. The next round of us accepting new project requests is 2024. And so that would really be the time. There's no recommendation from either us or finance committee right now is that we should be issuing debt, but as you start to balance the needs of new projects and project cost escalation, just realize that we have this tool of being able to leverage funds if and when you want to use that. So I went through that relatively quick. I know y'all are on a short schedule, but I'm glad to answer any questions you have.
Anybody have any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Wright, I believe this was the finance committee meeting. There was a question about the bond ratings specifically, and could you provide a little bit more detail about what localities might experience in terms of their expectations on bond ratings and what we could actually achieve?
Yeah, certainly we have a lot of strong rated communities, AAA rated communities, and that AAA is based upon your full faith in taxing power. And so AAA is the highest possible bond rating that you can achieve. But again, that's a general obligation based credit rating. In our case, we're revenue based. We're based on, and so there is no general obligation pledge. It's the bondholder's source of repayment is in our example here, the sales tax. And so as sales tax goes up and down, that debt service ratio goes up and down. So our expectation is to achieve those, ratings in the very strong AA category would be, should be our goal. We've seen other regional authorities do that and would represent us really well and get us a very low cost of funds.
Also, in your projections, have you also in these scenarios, have you taken into consideration in the future to switch over to the e-cars? And that, the income that CVTA will be getting from that?
No, sir. Those are
something that we should be thinking about?
I think as we gain clarity on that, and I think that's part of our rationale for excluding the fuels tax. And again, our understanding and having talked to most of the members is our objective is not to maximize our leverage here, to borrow as much money as we can, but rather have a conservative funding program that's going to allow us to potentially accelerate some projects and instead of just paying as we go, but allowing an ample amount of pay-go as we go based on these, technologies that will certainly be coming our way in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Thornton. Any other questions? I think that, based on the conversation we had earlier about the list, the schedule we approved earlier, we can see that there is some flexibility for us in the future if the time comes and we need to adjust as an organization how we're funding and paying for, the regional transportation projects. And we do know that in the future, there'll be other projects that'll come up regionally that we're going to have to work on. I did have a question on the numbers. if we go back to the original projections for the first year, we were down how much based below what the original projection was?
About, 7 million.
And then the second year, we were up 20 million, 25 million. So net probably 17 or 15 million ahead.
Yes, sir.
Oh.
And the first 3 months of 23 were on a similar track.
So we're 15 million ahead of what our original projections were based on the first 2 years, which was encouraging because we have been very conservative on what we looked at from our approach. And so we may have a little more capacity than what we thought to utilize and make up some of the shortfalls that we may have in some of the projects. So I think I appreciate the presentation. I think I've said that this is going to be shared with all of the members so you can take back to your jurisdictions. Any other questions before I let Kevin go? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Merry Christmas. This moves us forward to CVTA member comments, and I'm going to go back to my chair report first. I think I mentioned it at the last meeting that we have started or have been going around to the different jurisdictions. The last one we did was Hanover with our presentation. I think we're getting on a Goochland schedule. I think we have to reschedule that. Charles City, I think we actually got that scheduled today for January 24th. I think we're also working on the city of Richmond's scheduling as well. We were out in Powhatan in Ashland already. And we'll be presenting it to actually the Chesterfield next week on December the 14th. Chet will be before. What that? And New Kent on the 12th, I believe, in the evening. And so far, I think that from a citizen standpoint, they've appreciated the opportunity to see what the CVT actually does and get more information to the community. Other members? Yes.
Excuse me, it's always a problem of doing the comments after lunch. He wasn't able to stay for the full meeting, but I did want to introduce our new Chief of Public Transportation, Zach Trogdon. I believe Mr. Adkins is familiar with him as well as a few other members, but he started with us at the end of October, and we will be working on transitioning him into the alternate position under Director DeBrule. So you will not get to see my pretty face quite as much, but it has been a pleasure to serve as the alternate for the board.
Thank you. Dale, why don't you tell everybody about you too?
Sure. So for those of you who don't know me, thank you, sir. My name is Dale Totten. I'm the new Richmond District engineer, backfilling after Shane Mann's promotion to the deputy chief engineer of the agency. For those of you who don't know me, I've been with the department about 19 and a half years. Spent the first 7 years of my career serving Chesterfield and Powhatan counties, and then spent 5 years working regionally between Fredericksburg and Richmond districts, and 4.5 years in the Lynchburg district, and been back here in the Richmond district since 2019, where I most recently served as the deputy district engineer underneath Shane Mann. So very glad to be here on providing customer service to our localities across the district and doing what needs to get done. So thank you for the floor, sir.
Well, thank you. Congratulations on your promotion. We welcome you to the committee. And normally that is something we would have done in the beginning so people would know who you were. But we were rather rushed at the beginning of the meeting. And so I wanted to make sure that we got to it at least at the end of the meeting. So any other member comments?
Mr. Chairman, we have such great people around this table. But we also need to give kudos to, at least I would like to give kudos to two people we don't say that much about, but they're kind of in charge of the technology. And that's our fine clerk, Ms. Firestone, and also a person we don't recognize as much, that's Mr. Sid Kumar. And I think that they do a fantastic job keeping technology in its place.
You notice he hides himself in the camera. The guy who gets to control the camera gets to hide himself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thornton. That's absolutely correct. It's not, and you have pointed out this before, but it's not just those two critical positions, but it's all of the support staff that we get through Plan RVA that really helps us and certainly through our localities, all those who serve on the TAC. I didn't think we talked about the number, but there is a significant increase, and I know this, Mrs. Peterson, you appreciate it in actually the money that we've made through the investment portfolio. And so certainly the services provided by the treasurer in Chesterfield in that capacity, and certainly the services provided by everybody. I really think we've said this before. This is a really great committee. We have really great people regionally. Everybody works together very well, and we've. If you look at that transportation package that we passed early in the year, that's, when I can't wait to see how we do with the smart scale application, so we can actually start putting a shovel in the ground and start doing some of the actual physical work of all the fruits of the labor that the committee has done for the last couple of years. I'll end it with this. I hope that everybody has a very happy and safe holiday, no matter how you celebrate. I hope you have time to, because we all have busy schedules. We need to make sure we make the time to spend it with our families and loved ones. It's at the end of the day, when all this is done, none of us are going to go, man, I wish I had gone to more CVTA meetings. I think they're really going to say, I wish I'd maybe had a little more eggnog at Christmas, or perhaps I hugged my loved ones a little more. And so I wish for everybody, for me personally, a happy and safe holiday season, and build some great fond memories with those that matter the most, which is your loved ones. And not seeing any other discussion from the committee, I'll stand adjourned. Thank you, and we'll see you next year.